Quite a few years ago, DC had a Wendy's restaurant sitting on an island all by itself in a very busy intersection in the NoMa neighborhood. But in 2021, we were saying goodbye to that Wendy's. Mayor Bowser announced the closing of the Wendy's on Twitter. DC took the property through eminent domain so the city could change the dangerous and confusing intersection into something more simple to travel. One DC resident said, "The traffic is so bad, I've seen a car run through the Wendy's into the restaurant." Customers lined up from the front of the counter all the way to the back of the restaurant on the last day it was open just to order their Junior Bacon cheeseburgers, chicken nuggets, and Frosties. Wendy's corporate headquarters said in a statement, "The Wendy's restaurant at Dave Thomas Circle has been a beloved part of the brand and has served members of the community and commuters for decades. The name Dave Thomas Circle is synonymous with Wendy's and honors our founder, making it one of the most special and recognizable restaurants in our portfolio, and a highly valuable asset to the Wendy's company." Wendy's have been forced to close the restaurant and surrender possession to the District of Columbia by the end of September, so the district can begin their planned project. The company and our franchisee are still working through the court process to ensure that we are compensated appropriately for the restaurant relocation and for the lost name and business association between the Dave Thomas Circle and the Wendy's brand. A local elected official who was granted anonymity to speak bluntly to the Washington Post had said, "Almost anyone I know is like, eminent domain that sucker and move on. This is not difficult." The long-awaited redesign of Dave Thomas Circle, one of DC's most notorious intersections, began in July 2023. The project is expected to improve the safety of where Florida Avenue and New York Avenue meet, which has been a Northeast DC traffic hotspot. One lane and the sidewalks will be temporarily closed during the construction. The intersection is often referred to unofficially as Dave Thomas Circle, after Wendy's founder, Dave Thomas. A Wendy's restaurant operated at the center of the intersection from the 1980s until 2021. The demolition of the old restaurant started 2 years later, and once completed, the intersection will realign and add two-way traffic to First Street, restore two-way traffic on Florida Avenue, add protected bicycle lanes, create 3 new public park spaces, and make other safety improvements. For decades, drivers were just confused about which lane led to which direction, and this large intersection has always had congested traffic. A 2010 project by the District Department of Transportation made each of the streets one way around the block, similar to a traffic circle. DDOT calls the traffic pattern a virtual circle. It's a triangle forced into a roundabout. If you want to stay on Florida Avenue eastbound, you gotta make 3 turns and go through 3 traffic signals, all to stay on the street that you wanted to stay on. And hopefully you stay in your correct lane. The intersection developed a reputation as one of the most chaotic and dangerous intersections in DC. In 2018, the intersection of New York Avenue and First Street saw 102 crashes, making it the second most dangerous in the city. The District Department of Transportation, better known as DDOT, has long acknowledged the unusual geometry and high traffic volumes that make this intersection tricky and dangerous to navigate. Now that the Wendy's is gone, the unofficial Dave Thomas Circle name is no longer appropriate. So the Dave Thomas Circle is officially getting renamed. The NoMa Business Improvement District has partnered with DDOT to invite community members to suggest a new name for the new space. Director of DDOT, Everett Lott, has said, "We are excited about the new public spaces coming forward with the redesign of Dave Thomas Circle, and we look forward to the great ideas the community shares that captures the vibrancy and vitality of the corridor." The public was able to submit name recommendations for the space by completing an online survey. Surveys were also requested by mail. Following the first round of nominations, a selection of 5 names were presented for a community vote so the public could state their preferences for a new name. The community's vote would become the basis for the final naming recommendation for the new intersection and park space to be submitted to both the DC Council and Mayor Bowser. President and CEO of the NoMa BID, Maura Brophy, said, "The redesign of the Florida Avenue and New York Avenue Northeast intersection would transform that space in order to make it safer for pedestrians, bicyclists, and drivers, while also creating more than 1 acre of green space for the benefit of the community. We invite the public to submit naming suggestions for the new urban green space in NoMa that will include trees, plants, planters, seating, and public art." The 5 finalist choices were Douglas Crossing, referring to abolitionist Frederick Douglass; Mamie Peanut Johnson Plaza, referring to the baseball player who used to play in the Negro Leagues; third, the People's Plaza, which would recognize People's Drugstore, whose headquarters was in the DC area and had a warehouse right next to the circle, and to emphasize that the new space belonged to the people of the district. Fourth choice was 3 Stars Plaza, after the 3 stars on the DC flag. And finally, the Tiber Gateway, representing the Tiber Creek that used to run near the circle on 1st Street and was diverted underground. And the winner is Miss Mamie Peanut Johnson, the first female pitcher in the Negro Leagues and lived in DC for decades. Ms. Johnson won with 40% of the vote, according to a statement from the NoMa Business Improvement District. Mayor Bowser said in a statement, "Our community is ready to start a new chapter at this intersection, and we're off to a strong start by naming it after such an iconic woman. Mamie Peanut Johnson was a pioneer. Now, it is fitting that her name will represent these new spaces where residents and visitors can rest and play." Mamie Johnson was born September 27, 1935, in Ridgeway, South Carolina, as Mamie Belton, and passed away December 18, 2017, in Washington, D.C. A young Ms. Johnson played alongside the men on the Indianapolis Clowns, the same team that launched the career of Hall of Famer Hank Aaron. At 5'4" and less than 120 pounds during her career, Johnson earned her nickname after an unfriendly opponent observed that when she stood on the mound, she looked no bigger than a peanut. Ms. Johnson said she struck the batter out. "I worked just as hard as the fellas," she said to the Washington Post. "I pitched 9 innings just like everybody else. Some fellas acted ugly, but when they found out I was a ball player instead of some gimmick, they accepted us. I wasn't no doll baby," Johnson once said. "No girly girl. Baseball was all I knew, and I loved it." Young Mamie Belton's parents separated when she was young, and she initially lived with her grandmother. Although she remained in contact with her father, it was her mother's family who introduced her to baseball. During the off seasons from baseball, Johnson studied at New York University. She eventually received a degree in nursing from North Carolina A&T State University, and after the 1955 season, she left the Negro Leagues to begin her career as a nurse. She spent her career at Sibley Hospital in Washington, D.C., retiring in 1995. She later helped out at a Negro League memorabilia store in Capitol Heights, Maryland. The store was owned by her son, Charles. Ms. Johnson also coached youth baseball in the D.C. area. Later in life, Ms. Johnson made regular public appearances with former Negro League players. She was awarded the Mary McLeod Bethune Continuing the Legacy Award. In 2008, the Washington Nationals professional baseball team drafted Ms. Johnson to commemorate the history of the Negro Leagues, and in 2013, she was among a group of former Negro League players honored by U.S. President Barack Obama at the White House. The Negro Leagues Baseball Museum presented a bronze bust of Ms. Johnson in 2016, adding the piece to its Beauty of the Game exhibit, which celebrated female baseball players in the Negro Leagues. Her passion for baseball was passed on to young players in the Mamie Peanut Johnson Little League in Washington, D.C. This is not the first time the city has honored Ms. Johnson. The baseball field at the Rosedale Recreational Center in Northeast D.C. was named for her in 2013. The newly christened plaza, named after her, was expected to be completed in December 2024. I paid a visit to the new intersection at the end of February 2025. Obviously, as you can see, they're still not finished. There are noticeable changes, though, such as traffic from Eckington Place can now drive straight through the circle with its own traffic light. Also, the traffic traveling east from Florida Avenue can drive straight through without making multiple turns just to stay on Florida Avenue. So, how did this little hiccup of a traffic pattern get started? There's an article from the Washington Post that explains the story of Washington's weirdest traffic circle. The triangular traffic circle was a result of a gap in the original Pierre L'Enfant plan. The plan ended where the eastern end of O Street and the northern end of First Street reached Boundary Street, which is now called Florida Avenue. This small section of land is where they all met at the Tiber Creek, which was eventually buried and covered over. As the area developed over time, traffic congestion increased. Until 2021, the only property on the block was a Wendy's fast food restaurant and its parking lot, leading to the unofficial name of Dave Thomas Circle, after Dave Thomas, who founded Wendy's in 1969 and served as its spokesman. We don't think Pierre L'Enfant was drunk in 1791 when he plotted Washington as a grid of streets shot through with diagonal avenues, but he stopped the grid at the cliffs and hills that surrounded the federal city, and that left a dangling diagonal over the northeastern flank of the map, unnamed and unfinished. By 1861, city planners had given it a default name of Boundary Street because it was the boundary line of the official city. So as O Street and First Street reached their end at Boundary Street, in accordance with L'Enfant's plan, an orphaned triangle of land was born. Scott W. Berg, author of L'Enfant biography, Grand Avenues, the story of the French visionary who designed Washington, D.C., has said, "It feels like he just gave up. There's a lot of intersections in this plan, but along the edges, there's all kinds of super weird places in D.C. To make some intersections beautiful and significant, Other intersections will just have to be left over. This is the result. For years, it remained an untamed place where cascading creeks collided and burrowed themselves underground. Then in 1878, as DC began to spread into a metropolis, a man named Michael Esch was issued a building permit for a two-story brick dwelling on the triangle, now known as Square 709. Boundary Street was renamed Florida Avenue in 1890 after landowners complained that the original name sounded too sinister, so they changed it. Mr. Esch opened a flower shop, and by 1904, an electric trolley line and a railroad track had converged mere feet from his property to serve the outposts of Eckington and Bladensburg. Already the intersection had become busy and dangerous, a place to pass through or around. The brick building became a station for the Washington Railway and Electric Company when it decided in 1908 to soften a dangerous curve by rerouting its lines through the triangle. But as the steam engine gave way to the motor car in the 1920s, the building found another new life as Thomas J. Crowell's Fuel and Audio Body Shop. A wash and polish cost $2.50 back then. By 1949, it was a Texaco station that had a pinball machine inside. Before it was turned into a virtual circle, the busy intersection of New York Avenue and Florida Avenue was already a problem. It ranked DC's 7th most accident-prone area in a 2006 study. Florida Avenue was a straight shot through town back then, and the interstate drivers were treating New York Avenue like the freeway, and pedestrians were often caught in the crossfire. The 2006 study suggested that New York Avenue could be elevated over or tunneled under Florida Avenue, or that a true traffic circle could be constructed at that intersection. That same year, the National Capital Planning Commission suggested Wendy's could be replaced with a proper monument to someone other than Dave Thomas. And none of that happened. In 2010, DDOT transformed the triangle into the traffic roundabout that we know about today, making the Wendy's the focal point. With the gentrification of Eckington to the north of the circle and the Union Market to the east and the creation of the NoMa neighborhood to the south, the area around the old Dave Thomas Circle has become much of a destination as much as a place to travel through. I want to thank my sponsors for this video, Java J, or is it Java IJ, and Ya Oforiwa. I really want to thank you. I appreciate you. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. But here's my question to you for today. How do you feel about the old Dave Thomas Circle becoming the new Mamie Peanut Johnson Plaza? Do you think one of the other nominations were a better choice of a name? Or do you have another name that should have been considered? Have you driven through the New York Avenue and Florida Avenue intersection? Do you think little Wendy was so upset that you had to go to find another location to eat a Baconator? What you think? Let me know in the comments. I'm Dickie D, your DC tour guide, and I will see you around Washington.